I didn't learn the most important lessons of my life when I was young. I learned them when it was already too quiet to argue with my past. It happened on a rainy afternoon, the kind where the sky feels low and the house smells faintly of old books and wet pavement. I was sitting alone at my kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a mug gone cold, when I realized how many things I had misunderstood as a man. Not because no one told me, but because I was too busy proving myself to listen. For most of my life, I believed strength meant endurance without complaint. My father believed that too. He spoke little, worked until his hands stiffened, and thought reflection was something lazy people did when they ran out of purpose. I followed that model faithfully. I married young, worked hard, raised children, paid bills on time, and told myself that was wisdom enough. Our days were full back then. The sound of rice simmering on the stove, my wife humming softly as she folded laundry, the kids arguing over nothing important. I mistook motion for meaning. I thought being needed was the same as being understood. It wasn't until much later, after the children moved out, after my wife and I learned how to sit in the same room without speaking, that I found an old book at a secondhand shop. The pages were thin, the ink faded. It was a collection of sayings from ancient Chinese philosophers: Confucius, Lao Tzu, Zhuangzi, names I'd heard but never respected enough to explore. I bought it for $2 and carried it home under my coat like something fragile. That night, as the rain tapped steadily against the window, I read words written thousands of years ago and felt as though someone had been patiently waiting to correct me. Not angrily, not with judgment, just with truth. Some lessons, I realized, arrive early. Others wait until you are finally quiet enough to hear them. Before those words found me, my life followed a predictable rhythm. Wake before sunrise, coffee strong enough to sting the tongue, a commute spent rehearsing conversations I'd never have. At work, I was known as reliable, solid, the kind of man who didn't complain and didn't ask for much. I wore that reputation like armor. At home, I believed providing was the same as loving. I fixed what broke, paid what was owed, spoke when something needed correction. Silence, I thought, was peace. My wife, May, rarely challenged me outright. She moved through the house with a quiet efficiency that I mistook for contentment. When she sighed, I assumed it was exhaustion, not disappointment. The first lesson I stumbled upon in that old book stopped me cold. Confucius wrote that a man who conquers others is strong, but a man who conquers himself is mighty. I read it twice, then a third time. I'd spent my life conquering deadlines, promotions, arguments I refused to lose. But myself? I'd never questioned my impatience, my pride, my need to always be right. Small memories began resurfacing. May standing in the doorway waiting for me to notice her new haircut, my son clearing his throat before speaking, then deciding not to, my daughter's letters growing shorter once she moved away. At the time, I blamed the world for changing. I never considered that maybe I hadn't. Over dinner one evening, I mentioned the book. May looked up, surprised. "You read philosophy now?" she asked gently. There was no mockery in her voice, only curiosity mixed with something else. Hope, perhaps. "It says I've been confusing control with wisdom," I told her. My voice felt unfamiliar saying that aloud. She didn't respond right away, just nodded slowly and passed me the salt. Later that night, another line from Lao Tzu lingered in my mind. "Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know." For the first time, I wondered how much damage my certainty had done and how much silence I had ignored. The book became a quiet companion. I read it in the early mornings before the house stirred, the pages whispering lessons I was only just beginning to understand. What surprised me most was how gentle the words were. They didn't accuse, they observed, and somehow that made them harder to dismiss. Zhuangzi wrote about the danger of living life as a race, mistaking speed for direction. That one unsettled me. I'd spent decades rushing, toward promotions, toward retirement, toward some imagined finish line where peace was supposed to be waiting. I never asked what I was running from. The first real test of these lessons came unexpectedly. My son called one evening. His voice was tight, controlled. He told me he was thinking of leaving his job, that the pressure was eating at him. Instinctively, I prepared my advice, practical, efficient, unsolicited. but something in his pause stopped me. So I did something unfamiliar. I waited. The silence stretched. I could hear his breathing through the phone. Finally, he said, "I didn't call for solutions. I just wanted you to hear me." That sentence landed heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I remembered another line from the book. Wisdom begins when we listen more than we speak. "I'm listening," I said quietly. After we hung up, I sat alone in the dark living room, the clock ticking loudly on the wall. I realized how often I'd spoken over the people I loved, believing leadership meant direction instead of presence. How many conversations had I ended before they truly began? May noticed the change before I did. One night, as we washed dishes side by side, she said, "You're different lately." "Better or worse?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Quieter, and somehow closer." That night I reread a passage about humility, that water, though soft, shapes stone over time. Strength, it suggested, wasn't about force, it was about patience. And patience, I was learning, was the lesson I had delayed the longest. The deeper I read, the more uncomfortable the truths became. Lao Tzu wrote that holding on too tightly is the same as losing. I felt that one in my chest. I had spent years gripping my role as provider, decision-maker, protector, afraid that if I loosened my hands, everything would fall apart. The realization came one Sunday afternoon. May and I were sorting through old boxes in the garage, papers yellowed with age, children's drawings, forgotten photographs. I found a birthday card from her, written years ago. Inside, she had written, "I miss you, even when you're right here." I sat down hard on the concrete floor. The garage smelled of dust and motor oil. May knelt beside me, her movements careful, as if approaching something fragile. "I didn't know how to say it back then," she said softly. "You were always so certain. I didn't want to disturb that." In that moment, the betrayal wasn't hers, it was mine. Not through cruelty, but through absence, through a pride that left no room for vulnerability. Confucius warned that regret is born when we fail to cultivate our inner life. I finally understood what he meant. I had nurtured everything except myself, and in doing so, neglected those closest to me. "I thought I was doing my best," I whispered. "You were," replied May, "but you were doing it alone." We talked longer that day than we had in years, not solving, not fixing, just admitting. The weight of unsaid things lifted slowly, like a window opening in a stale room. That evening, I noticed how the house sounded different, softer, less echoing. Even the ticking clock seemed less accusatory. Another lesson surfaced from the book. When you let go of who you think you should be, you become who you are. I couldn't change the past, but for the first time, I wasn't trying to defend it either. Change didn't arrive all at once. It came in small, almost invisible decisions. Choosing to ask instead of assume, to pause instead of correct, to admit when I didn't know. These choices felt unnatural at first, like writing with my non-dominant hand. One afternoon, my daughter visited with her young son. He spilled juice across the table, red spreading quickly over the wood. My old instinct surged, sharp words forming before thought. But then I remembered a line from Zhuangzi about flexibility, about how rigid trees snap in storms, while the bending ones survived. I handed my grandson a towel instead. "Accidents happen," I said. His shoulders relaxed instantly, and I felt something soften in me too. Later, my daughter watched me from the doorway. "You've changed," she said, echoing her mother. "I waited too long," I replied. She shook her head. "You're here now." That night, alone with the book again, I reached a section about time. The philosopher wrote that men often chase success early and seek meaning late, when strength is faded, but clarity has finally arrived. The words stung because they were true. I thought about all the men I knew who measured life in achievements and losses, never asking what kind of person those measurements were shaping them into. I had been one of them. But the lesson wasn't about regret, it was about responsibility. Wisdom the book insisted, wasn't proven by how much you know, but how you live once you know better. The next morning, I called an old friend I'd fallen out with over a pointless disagreement years ago. My voice shook as I apologized. There was a long pause on the line before he said, "I've been waiting for that call." When we hung up, the house felt lighter. Not because things were perfect, but because I had finally stopped resisting the weight of my own growth. Some lessons arrive late, but they don't arrive too late unless we refuse to act on them. The changes didn't go unnoticed beyond our home. At a small family gathering, my brother pulled me aside. The room buzzed with overlapping conversations, the smell of roasted meat and soy sauce lingering in the air. "You're quieter," he said, studying me. "Everything okay?" "Better than okay," I replied. "I finally realized I don't have to win every room I walk into." He laughed, but there was curiosity behind it. Later that evening, when a familiar debate sparked at the table, politics, old grudges, the usual triggers, I listened instead of interrupting. When I spoke, I chose my words carefully. The tension eased. People noticed. That was another lesson from Confucius. Harmony is not sameness, but balance. I had spent years mistaking dominance for leadership. Now I saw how restraint created space for others. Word traveled quietly. A younger colleague at work asked me for advice, not about advancement, but about managing anger. I shared what I was learning, not as instruction, but as confession. He nodded, relieved. Vulnerability, I discovered, invited trust far more than authority ever had. The real consequence came when my son told me he felt closer to me than he ever had. We were walking together, the crunch of gravel under our shoes, autumn air sharp in our lungs. "I used to think you didn't care how I felt," he said. "I know now, you just didn't know how to show it." I stopped walking, put a hand on his shoulder. "I wish I'd learned sooner." He met my eyes. "You learned when it mattered." That night, I returned to the final pages of the book. One last lesson stood out. The wise man leaves no trace, yet nothing is left undone. I understood then that wisdom wasn't about being seen as wise. It was about leaving behind less harm and more understanding than you found. Healing, I learned, isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with grand gestures or perfect apologies. It settles in quietly, like morning light slipping through a half-open curtain. Months passed. May and I developed new rituals, slow walks after dinner, tea shared in comfortable silence, conversations that didn't rush toward conclusions. Sometimes we talked about the past, not to reopen wounds, but to understand them. Other times we let silence do the work words couldn't. One evening she said, "You seem more at peace with yourself." I thought about that, about how the need to prove had faded, about how letting go of control hadn't diminished me, it had softened the edges that kept others away. "I finally stopped fighting time," I said. Another teaching from the philosophers echoed in my mind. Acceptance is not resignation. I'd always confused the two. I believed accepting reality meant giving up. Now I knew it meant working with life instead of against it. I began mentoring younger men at work, not with lectures, but with listening. I watched them wrestle with the same fears I once had. The fear of being insignificant, of falling behind, of not measuring up. I didn't offer ancient quotes unless they asked. I offered presence. At home, laughter returned in unexpected moments, a shared joke, a memory recalled without bitterness. The house felt lived in again, not just occupied. I understood then that wisdom doesn't erase mistakes. It teaches you how to carry them without letting them define you. Regret becomes a teacher instead of a jailer. The final lesson that stayed with me was simple. A good life is built in small moments, tended daily. I had chased big achievements for decades. In the end, it was the small, deliberate acts of kindness and humility that brought peace. And peace, I realized, was never waiting at the finish line. It had been walking beside me all along, patient, unnoticed, and quietly persistent. As I sit here now, the house quiet but no longer empty, I think about how many men reach the second half of life still carrying the armor that once helped them survive, but now only weighs them down.
Ancient wisdom didn't change my life because it was old. It changed my life because it was honest. If you're listening to this and recognizing yourself and my mistakes, let me ask you something gently. What lesson has life been trying to teach you that you've been too busy to hear? If this story spoke to you, take a moment to reflect, to share your thoughts, and to walk a little more softly with the people you love. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, you know where to find me.